Hello and Tesla. So here I am with our fifth chapter, that is United Nations and its organizations. Now I've divided this chapter into three different parts, and this is the part one of our chapter. Now before we proceed with the chapter, let's look at our syllabus again. Now earlier this chapter used to be sixth chapter. However, with the removal of the third chapter, it has become the fifth chapter, and there's a slight change in the name as well over here. This is the name for the old one, international organizations, and the new name for the chapter is United Nations and its organizations. Now if you look in the contents under the restructuring and the future of the United Nations, we are going to focus more on the Security Council and the needs for its expansion, which is mentioned in this new syllabus. And they have removed the India's position in the restructured United Nations. All right, and instead of this whole section, we are going to do UNESCO, UNICEF, WHO, and the ILO, which are the key agencies. Now, there are a number of key agencies. However, we are going to focus only on these four. And of course, we are going to do the principal organs of the United Nations. All right. Now, before we actually do the United Nations, it's very important for us to understand the need for international organizations such as United Nations, because we all know that international organizations are very important. Especially international organizations such as the United Nations has become so important that it's a must-have, or has become indispensable as it represents the great hope of humanity for peace and progress. So how has these international organizations become so important, or why is the need for these international organizations? We have 2 points over here. First, it helps in matters of war and peace. Okay, now countries are bound to have conflicts. So, but then it doesn't necessarily mean that these conflicts should turn into war. So it is here that international organizations becomes important, because these international organizations, they can provide mechanisms, they can provide rules to discuss their contentious issues or their conflicting issues and find peaceful solutions rather than going to war, because we all know that war is always destructive. Okay, and second reason is it helps countries to cooperate. Now, besides issues or conflicts which involves two or few countries, there are other issues such as global issues like global warming, acute diseases, terrorism, pandemic. For example, as of now, we have this COVID-19. So these problems can be dealt only when all the nations come and work together. All right. So in these matters, these international organizations, they can produce information, they can produce ideas about how to cooperate on these global issues. All right. Now, we must also understand that an international organization is not a super state, meaning this international organization is not above the states. All right, because an international organization is created by and it responds to states. It comes into being when states agree to its creation. All right. And once created, it helps the member states to resolve their problems peacefully. However, this international organization does not have authority over its members. So, international organization is not a super state. So, having understood the need for international organizations, let us move on to the evolution of United Nations. And for this, we need to go back to the First World War. Now, the First World War ended in 1918, right? With the end of the World War I, all the countries were devastated. So, this led the countries to come together and form an international organization that could prevent further conflict. All right. So this led to the formation of League of Nations in 1920. Now, the main job of the League of Nations was to prevent any further war. However, it failed, and we know that Second World War happened, which led to the further devastation of the whole world. Now, with these two wars, the countries have learned a very good lesson that in order to prevent further devastation and to build their nations, the only way is through cooperation, which we have already studied in our first chapter. So the only option was a stronger international organization. And because of that, the United Nations organization was established as a successor to the League of Nations in 1945. Okay, that was right after the Second World War. Now, this organization, or the United Nations, it came into being with the signing of the United Nations Charter first by 51 states. Okay, so in the beginning they had 51 states, but as of now, there are 193 member states, South Sudan being the last member to join the United Nations. Now here, the United Nations, they try to achieve where the League of Nations have failed. Okay. Now, if you look at the objectives of the United Nations, we know that the United Nations has become an indispensable organization, or it's a must-have organization. So sometimes in your board examination, they might ask you the objectives of the United Nations, or they might ask you why is United Nations indispensable. So you can just write the same answer for that. All right. So the United Nations main objective is to prevent international conflict and to facilitate cooperation among states. So they just provide informations, and they facilitate among different states to cooperate within one another. And this is done so as to stop the conflicts between the states from turning or escalating into war. However, if war did break out, then the job of the United Nations would be to limit the extent of the hostilities. For example, we have international law on the conduct of hostilities. Let's say, one of the examples would be not to harm the civilians during a war. Okay. And another, objectives of the United Nations is to improve world social and economic development, because the lack of social and economic development is the key reason for conflicts. And therefore, the United Nations, they try to work in bringing the countries together so that they can improve their social and economic development all over the world. Now, in your board examination, questions on the objectives of the United Nations or why is United Nations indispensable can come for 2 marks. But if it comes for 4 marks, then besides these points, you can also add points from or points of the need for international organizations, which we have done earlier. All right. So if you add these points on top of the objectives of the United Nations, then you are good to go. All right. Next, we have the United Nations organs. Now, we know that the United Nations started functioning with 51 nations as its original members. And we also know that as of now, the membership has increased to 193, South Sudan being the last member to join the United Nations on 14th July 2011. Okay, now the United Nations system is based on 5 principal organs. Initially, it had 6. However, the Trusteeship Council was suspended in 1994. Just so you know, this chart has been taken from your textbook, okay? Now, all the green boxes that you see in this chart are the principal or the main organs of the United Nations, and the white boxes, those are the various funds, programs, specialized agencies, and etc. of the United Nations. Now, as per your syllabus, we need to cover the main organs or the principal organs and 4 specialized agencies, which we'll be doing later, okay? So the first organ that we're going to do is the General Assembly. Now, General Assembly is a world parliament with 193 member states. Okay, each member has 1 vote only, and the major decisions requires 2/3 majority. However, if it's of a regular concern, then it just needs a simple majority. That's how it works, okay? Now, its annual session is held once annually in September, and the main functions of the General Assembly include electing non-permanent members of the Security Council, the new non-permanent members of the Security Council, and the members of the Economic and Social Council, the judges of the International Court of Justice, and the Secretary General. Besides electing new members, one of the main jobs of the General Assembly is also to maintain international order and to discuss all matters that concerns the United Nations Charter. Now, we need to keep in our mind that decisions made in the General Assembly are not binding on the UN members. Fine? Next we have is the Security Council. Now, the Security Council is responsible for peace and war. That is important to remember, all right? Now, this Security Council, it consists of 15 members, out of which 5 are permanent and 10 are non-permanent members. Now the 5 permanent members are Britain, Russia, United States, France and China. The rest 10 non-permanent members, they are elected for a 2-year term by the General Assembly. Fine. Now this council meets twice a month and its decisions are binding to all UN members. Now it's important for us to remember over here that the decisions made by the Security Council, those are binding to all United Nations members. However, the decisions of the General Assembly, those are not binding to all UN members. Okay, so you need to know the difference over here. And it's also important for us to remember that out of those 15 members, the 5 permanent members, they have got veto power or the right to reject a resolution. We'll learn more about veto later, okay? Now, the main functions of a Security Council, that includes maintaining international peace and to settle disputes peacefully, all right? And besides that, it also takes action against the aggressor states by imposing sanctions, all right? Now, the next one we have is the Economic and Social Council, also known as the ECOSOC. Now, this council has 54 members and those members are elected by the General Assembly. Okay, the main function of this ECOSOC is to promote social, economic, cultural and educational cooperation between the member states. Okay, and this 54 seats representation is based on geographical location. Okay, and then we have the Secretariat. Now the Secretariat, this is the permanent office of the United Nations. Now this Secretariat, it composes of tens of thousands of international UN staff members and the Secretary General. So Secretariat basically means thousands of international UN staff members and a Secretary General. Fine. Now these staff members, these international staff members that I just talked about, are recruited internationally and locally, okay? And these people, they carry out the day-to-day work of the United Nations or of all the principal organs. And these people, these international staff members, or the office as such, the Secretariat, that is headed by the General Secretary, who is appointed by the General Assembly on the recommendation of the Security Council for a 5-year renewable term, right? Now, the current Secretary General is Antonio Guterres, and he actually is the former Prime Minister of Portugal, and he has been in the office since 2017. And we must also remember that he is the 9th Secretary General of the United Nations. Next, we have the International Court of Justice. Okay, now the International Court of Justice is the judicial organ of the United Nations. Okay, and it is based in Hague, Netherlands. And why am I focusing on this? Because out of these 6 organs of the United Nations, this is the only organ which is not located in New York, USA. Okay, so with exception to this, all the other 5 organs, now those are located in New York. Fine. Now this court, it consists of 15 judges elected for 9 years by absolute majority, both in the General Assembly and the Security Council. And the main functions of this International Court of Justice include to settle disputes between member states and to give advice to the General Assembly and the Security Council on international law. Finally, we have the Trusteeship Council, which is no more functional. Now, this council was created in 1945. In order to understand this, we need to go back to the history again. Now, after Second World War, following the decolonization, many colonial countries, they gained independence. For example, India, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, and etc. Okay. However, at that time, there were few colonial countries, in fact, 11 territories, which were not prepared to govern themselves due to various reasons. So these 11 territories, they were known as trust territories. Okay. And the United Nations, they created this Trusteeship Council in 1945 to supervise the administration of these 11 trust territories, which were not fully self-governing. Okay. Now, the job of the United Nations was to help them prepare for self-governing and independence. So, with the passage of time, many of these territories became independent or they have joined independent countries. And with the independence of Palau, the last UN trust territory, the Trusteeship Council was suspended in 1994. And as I said before, so this Trusteeship Council is no more functional. So in this clip, we have learned about the need of international organs, the emergence of United Nations, its objectives, and why it is indispensable, and of course, the 6 principal organs. Okay, I'll be leaving the web page of the United Nations in the description box below so that you can have a look at their web page and you can have a better and detailed understanding. All right, in our next video, we'll be covering the proposed reforms for the United Nations. So until I meet you in my next video, take care.